So this is a collaborative leadership part 3, and today we're going to talk about how to include others in decision making. I'm going to focus largely on doing this through the context of a meeting, how you set that up, how do you include others in decision making. A few points for you on how to do that. First of all, this is the most critical, and that is you've got to get convinced that collaborative decision making is the best way. You've got to be convinced that there is rarely one right way to do something. So therefore, it's not about trying to find the perfect right way, but rather involving and including others, getting ownership on a way is better than you trying to find the right one way. There's often many different solutions, many different ways to answering the same problem or challenge or strategy going forward. It's not so much the perfect way, but it's about inclusion, ownership. You could have perhaps an average course of action, but if everyone is convinced, if everyone's on board, if everyone's owning it, the outcome could be way more significant than having a perfect direction that no one is on board for. So it is really important that you as the leader first get convinced collaborative decision making is the best way forward. The second thing is this: set the ground rules for decision making processes. Set the ground rules for a meeting. Some of those ground rules will include things like this: everyone invited to be involved in a decision should speak up. I will always make sure when someone is included in a meeting, they are clear that I want them to speak up. Not speaking up is not an option. You're not a casual member of the team. You were invited because you're valuable, you have something to offer, your voice is needed to be heard. Therefore, as the leader, it's important that you draw out the voice of each person. I've often found that the quietest member can often come out with the richest contribution, something we would have all missed if we hadn't heard their voice. The other thing I make as a principle in many decision-making processes is that I give people an idea before a decision-making moment, before a meeting, of what we're going to talk about. So it's important that you don't just give an agenda to a meeting, but you give what I call an executive summary of the content of that meeting. So it's not just an item in an agenda, but a description of what will be discussed. And if you as the leader are not the only contributor, if there are other contributors to that discussion, make sure they are putting in their summary before the meeting. That way everyone can be best prepared. That way those who are potentially the deepest thinkers are particularly well prepared, because they especially will want to give some forethought to the decision-making process. And finally, another principle I work on is accountability. And that is that notes are taken, actions are summarized, and people are held accountable to those actions. There's nothing worse than having an effective decision-making process, making important decisions, or even less important decisions, but important to the ongoing process of the journey of your organization, and things aren't getting done because notes weren't taken, actions weren't attributed to someone, and accountability wasn't followed up. So very often at the start of every meeting that I'm in, the first agenda item is, let's review the actions from the last meeting. Did you do this? Have you done that? Accountability is such an important part of collaborative teamwork. So the first is get convinced. The second is set the ground rules. The third point I want to make is start with a safe decision. Now, what do I mean by that? If you're a newly formed team, so often people say to me is, I don't have a team that is ready yet to be that included in decision making. I think that's a false excuse. I think everyone is ready to some degree to be included in a process The question is, what depth of process are they ready for? So the trust may not be built yet, experience may not be gained yet, skills may not be accumulated yet to make the most in-depth and serious decisions, but there is no doubt the moment you form a team, you can start the culture, set the culture of what collaborative decision-making is all about. You can, in spoken ways and unspoken ways, set the culture in meetings, set the culture around you as the leader that you are inclusive, that you are wanting to hear, that you are listening as much as you are talking. You are setting culture. You create culture by what you deliberately format and what you deliberately allow to happen. That is to say, if there's some things that are happening where some people are railroading meetings, you need to speak into that because you need to deliberately form the culture. You creating a decision-making environment where people are allowed to speak, you are creating that deliberate culture. So one of the things you can do then to start forming that culture in the early days is to bring into a meeting a very simple decision so that you can show how collaborative you are. It may even be a decision that is obvious to you. It may be a decision that in your mind you've already made up the answer to. Now that is not good practice long term, of course, but in the short term as you're coaching a team toward collaboration, putting into a meeting one or two ideas that are safe for any outcome, really, for discussion is a good thing. Because what it's showing a team is you're prepared to throw in to a meeting a question and hear their ideas. In fact, it's really good practice. I've done this many times, that you deliberately surrender your preconceived idea and acknowledge someone else's as better in this instance. When a team sees the leader as surrendering their opinion, they really feel empowered. So start with some safe topics, start with some safe decisions, collaborate and include on some very simple matters. Now here is the challenge you as a leader will find is long-term, those simple matters you may not be collaborative about because you're more interested in being collaborative about the deeper, more serious, long-lasting decisions, and the simple decisions you're not even involved in. They are making them. And so the temptation in the early days is to not be collaborative on the simple things. But it's in those things they learn the art of being collaborative with you. And finally, on this session, as we're talking about how to make collaborative decisions, you then need to move from the simple to the more complex decision-making process. And I want to quickly outline for you how this will look. I feel like the open brainstorm is not always the best way to come up with a decision. Sometimes it can be if you've got a lot of time, if you're going away on a retreat for a day with your team and you've got some far-reaching long-term decisions to make and you want to start with an open brainstorm, it can just loosen up the day. But very often an open brainstorm can lead to too many different outcomes. It can lead to complexity of decision making. It can lead to paralysis of creativity. It can sometimes do the opposite to what's intended. What can be much more useful on a normal running week when it comes to decision making is to do a lot of pre-thought, or do a lot of pre-collaboration. By that I mean it's much more useful to bring to a meeting 2 or 3 very well thought through feasible options that in that meeting you're going to make a decision on one of those options. Now to do that, you will probably need to have started to talk to the team one-on-one, get their ideas forming, just doing some research, maybe even outside of your church or organization amongst what's going on out there, what is best practice thinking. Get some research done so you're already beginning to shape and funnel some sort of direction without being pre-conscribed. If you're not putting together some options, what you might want to do, and this is what I'll sometimes do, is just put together some parameters at least and go, look, guys, today there's a number of options we could come up with. We're going to brainstorm, but here are the parameters. These parameters fit within the values of our organization. These parameters fit within what seems to be current best practice. These parameters fit within what seems doable at the moment with the resources we've got, although we should allow that to be challenged because sometimes that can limit our creativity. We need to think way out of the box. But what I'm trying to say to you is a good meeting that is going to make decisions in a short space of time will have been prepared. Come ready. Occasionally, very occasionally, you as the leader need to come with just one option. I'll give you an example. Recently in our church, we decided that we would start a third location of our church. It was something we as a team had already been discussing and just throwing out the idea of. But there came a moment within my spirit in prayer, I felt like now was the time to begin the process of the launch. Now, what do I do with that? Do I throw that up for debate or not? Well, as the visionary leader, it's okay for you at times to come to the team and go, guys, this is what I believe is the right way. In that case, what I did is I presented only one option. That was the option. We're going to start a third location. I believe we should start the launch process of that this year. That's what I'm tabling now. Let's discuss it. Do we all get a sense of peace about this? Let's pull apart the thought process a little bit. Let's test, is the timing right? Is the thought process right? But you as the visionary leader always have that, you reserve the right of that ability to bring a vision and bring it with clarity and strength and say, now guys, I think this is the time. And then you can begin to hear their voice to help shape it. Sometimes they may go, look, well, if we wait just one more month, I think we'll be ready to form the communication better. Or they may go, look, okay, that's cool. Let's start to begin to form the team like this. They will begin to put the pieces together, but don't be afraid at times to put together one option only and then be collaborative in shaping that option. Okay, trust that's helpful in helping you form a decision-making process through the context of a meeting.